Hello, all. This is the How to Make a podcast. So, we're going to talk about the steps that I go through when I'm trying to make a podcast for my class. One of the first things I do is organize. If I'm not organized, it's very hard for me to envision the podcast all the way through and the impact it's going to have on my students. So, first, I think about what do I want my students to get out of this? Do I want them just to be introduced to something? Do I want to extend an idea? Am I showing them a molecular simulation? What am I doing? And I think about those things that I need to put on the podcast and which things are better for me to talk about in the classroom where I can interact with the students. So I really try to put, more low-level information in my podcast, introduction stuff. All right, so what do? Well, first off, you want to give the information during your podcast. For me, usually that means just some basic introductory information and maybe one or two practice problems that I show them how to work through. You can use a PowerPoint to guide you, as I am now. Sometimes I'll use PowerPoints, most of the time. And then also I'll add in snippets of like classroom demonstrations or even molecular simulations that I am manipulating myself and then voicing over what's going on to help the students' conceptual understanding. You don't want to spend 20 minutes, though, just straight up reading from a PowerPoint. It gets really boring. The students will tell you that you sound like death. Trust me. You want to try to limit the video to 13 minutes max. I usually try to hit lower than that. I like mine around the 8-minute range. You just don't want to bore them. You want to use voice inflection and jokes and cartoons. You want to leave the bloopers. They like the bloopers. Just remember that you don't have to be perfect when you're doing this. You want to be yourself because that's what the students want. They want to see and hear their teacher. All right, here's a joke that I've put on one of my podcasts before. I thought you said the chemical composition for water was H2O. So here he writes on the board the letters H2O. If you're a chemistry person, you get it. Hopefully you get it either way. But just something just to lighten the mood a little bit during the podcast. All right, this is a process I specifically go through. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to make a PowerPoint with basic information and maybe one or two practice problems. My PowerPoints usually that I use to make my podcast aren't longer than 5 or 6 slides. I then go ahead and make a corresponding notes guide that has questions that go directly with my podcast so that they can do the podcast along with me and answer these questions using the notes guide. I actually then go ahead and answer my own notes guide because I know it sounds crazy. I'm not perfect. So I do make mistakes from time to time. It helps me catch the errors before I'm in the middle of a podcast and then I'm like, oh snap. The next thing you want to do is you want to record the podcast with one of the recording programs, and then you can either just straight up publish it or you can edit it with a video recording program. I'll talk about those in some of my future podcasts, so make sure if you're interested in that, you stay tuned. And that's all there is to it, making a podcast.